When I say Ethiopia, what comes to mind? Did you know they're one of the fastest growing countries globally, with an average of 10% annual growth for the last 15 years? What about the fact that Ethiopia is the second most populated country in Africa, with over 100 million people? Don't worry if you didn't know these facts. We have Markos and Florian joining us today. Together, they both founded the first startup accelerator in Ethiopia called Iceaddis 9 years ago, and they're about to school us on the exploding growth coming from this country. Hi, I'm Dana Yao, your host on the Emerging Markets Tech Startups podcast. While traveling to over 90 countries, I was inspired by the entrepreneurial spirit across startup communities in Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. On the show, we bring you stories from entrepreneurs, startup ecosystem innovators, and investors. We discuss what makes these markets culturally and historically unique, local trends, local challenges consumers and founders face, and the opportunities. Let's get started. So welcome Florian and Markos from Iceaddis. I'm so psyched to talk about Ethiopia, which is a mystery to some people outside of the African continent. So can you both introduce yourself at the same time? No, I'm kidding. One of you go first.
That would be tough. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so my name is Markos Lama. I am the co-founder of Iceaddis from Ethiopia. Thank you for having me here. It's like so. We've been in the market in the last close to 10 years, starting from like May 2011, and we have witnessed like the growth of like the ecosystem. So I'm very happy like to have chats.
I'm Florian. I started in Ethiopia in 2012, and I got there through the German Development Corporation. So I joined Iceaddis. At that time, my background is product design, industrial design. So to also take a look at the more hardware-related startups.
It's amazing. And you're originally German? Did people think you were crazy when they're like, yeah, I'm just going to fly to Ethiopia for years? What brought you there in the first place?
Yeah, it was, so GIZ, the German Development Corporation, I applied for a job there because I found it quite interesting to look into new markets and emerging markets. And I've been in Ethiopia before in 2010, was quite amazed by the country, the culture and everything. And I was like, yep. Why not try something in the tech sector there? And that my contract lasted 3 years, but then I stayed even longer, another 4 years. So
GIZ seems to be one of the leading organizations investing in Africa's startup ecosystem. We had a previous podcast guest out of Kenya, Mutumbe, who's a local Kenyan that was hired by GIZ to help entrepreneurs and incubate the startup ecosystem based out of Nairobi. People are really curious about what is going on in Ethiopia regarding the startup ecosystem, but the country as a whole. Can you maybe share, either of you, a fun fact about the market that people should know?
Like a lot of people know about Ethiopia, like about like some like very discrete, disconnected facts. Probably like people know, about athletics. People know Ethiopia are like good runners, or like Ethiopia is not colonized. With like probably the only African country like not colonized, right? So people know about the famine issue like in the early 80s. Now like maybe GERD, like because there's a huge like dam project is going on, like that's also created like some dispute between Egypt and Sudan. So there's like like this disconnected like historical facts people might know, but yeah, I mean, I think the GERD itself is like quite positive, like for Ethiopia, like a lot of people proud of it because it's going to be like the biggest dam in Africa. There's like Ethiopia has like very unique culture and its own language preserved like for like a lot of many years.
Yes, Amharic is a beautiful language.
It's the second country accepting Christianity in the 4th century. It's like Ethiopia was accepted like Christianity even before Europe accepted Christianity, so it's a very old nation.
According to Wikipedia, Christianity makes up about 63% of the population.
And a lot of people also think that like it's the origin of humankind, because the first human was found in Ethiopia.
Is this Lucy?
Yeah, that was Lucy. Yeah.
Wow, Lucy's Ethiopian. Wait, that means we're all part Ethiopian since we're the descendants of Lucy.
Yeah, like the ancestors, right? And currently, of course, like Ethiopia being fast development in terms of GDP is being like very impressive. In the last 10 years, like it was double digits growth. And in a
Whoa,
couple of
what
years,
percentage?
it was like around 11%. And
Whoa.
there were times where Ethiopia was like number one in the whole GDP like performance globally for a couple of years.
And what's contributing to this high growth?
A lot of like agriculture-based industrialization efforts. So there's a lot of like investment on agriculture and infrastructure. So there is a lot of like construction sector is like performing very much, and there's also like some industries like textile being like established. So there's a lot of industrial parks popping up everywhere in the country. So it has like a very like Chinese style developmental model, which works actually quite well. Per se, like if you're looking at the export performance, it's really very poor actually. Like there is a lot of like difference between import and export, but in other sectors, like just in general, like the number of people out of poverty every year is like incredible in that regard.
Another thing I realized when I went to visit, you said on top of the Chinese like development, there were just a bunch of Chinese people there. I was seeing Chinese signs and everything. So what is that about?
So yeah, there's a lot of foreign investment coming from China in infrastructure projects. So I think, I mean, for example, a huge part of the railway project, but then also the highway construction that was financed from Chinese, basically. So they put a lot of money in infrastructure because for them, of course, it's also interesting as a manufacturing hub. So outside of
Yeah,
China.
you're seeing private sector companies like Trenchant, a Chinese company, which is the largest smartphone manufacturer by sales in Africa. They have a huge manufacturing operations based out of Ethiopia. And this isn't specific to Ethiopia. When I was visiting Zambia last year, locals there told me Chinese families were moving into the country and setting up really successful businesses there. Help me understand, or the crowd understand, how large is the market opportunity in terms of population, and anything special about the demographics you guys want to call out?
Yeah, the population is like this, the second largest population in Africa after Nigeria. So it's we Ethiopian population is currently around 105 to 110 million people, and most of the people are like young people. So if you're looking at the demographic, like majority of Ethiopians are like under the age of 25, and this is like kind of a blessing and a curse in the market. In one hand, is like there's a huge number of like people coming to the university to support the industry, but on the other hand, it's like we're seeing a lot of protests from the young people with lack of jobs and stuff like that. But on the other side, like if you're looking at the market, we're also looking at the consumers like capacity. Like so, there is 85% of the Ethiopian peoples like based in rural place and based agriculture.
Wow, that's really interesting. 85% of the Ethiopian population is still living in rural areas.
We have around like 12 million farmers who are engaging in every form of like farming. So you can imagine that like Ethiopia is a very agricultural based country. But on the other side, like I said before, like the rapid economical growth really brings like a very positive side where the consuming capacity is increasing compared to like the last few years, right? So that's something interesting in the market, but also like it's very it's very diverse in some ways. Like Addis Ababa, for instance, can be very expensive if you're looking at housing. It's really like as expensive like as like some place like New York, some like the rent and stuff. So it's quite diverse in terms of like how people are living. So there is a different kind of like wealth. And there's also like a lot of foreign investment, like Florian said, from China. It's FDI is like becoming quite the first priority for Ethiopia, like to look for from other countries. So there's a lot of investment.
Markos, you just mentioned housing in Addis is just as expensive as in New York, and I'm sure salaries are not as high. So how are people affording this? And is this pointing to a large gap in inequality between the rich and poor?
So land is scarce in Addis Ababa mainly. So in land prices just exploded, skyrocketed over the last couple of years. I think, yeah, when I moved to Addis, you might have been able to buy yeah, a house, I would say, in the city for let's say $200,000. I think now it's rather at $1 million or something, like for a small plot with like 500 square meters. I'm like, wow, okay, who can afford that actually?
Right. How is that impacting the local people?
Yeah, I think it's in Addis specifically, a lot of people working for foreign corporations, more than I think also, yeah, there is a upper middle class and upper class that can afford these high prices. I think they're the drivers of real estate development. On the other hand, you see like that a lot of communities or people are being moved outside of the city center into condominium projects that are financed by government. So that's, yeah, that the current development. I think it's sad because it's like breaking up the social fabric a little bit, like in the city. So that's what we've been seeing over the last decade.
Feels like the gentrification phenomenon that's happening everywhere around the world. Imagine, a tech company wants to build for Ethiopia, especially since it's so up and coming, it's such a huge market. What do they have to know about people's mindset, their local culture, history? Anything you guys want to share?
In general, like the app development is not very different from like building a company in Ethiopia. So um, I think there is a lot of like community value when you build something. So you need to involve like a group of people that are interested in, and also think about like every business you build, think about like the community around you. There's a sense of like community in every business in Ethiopia. I think that's quite important. But on the other side, it's like especially like for tech startups, um, there is like a huge challenge in terms of like infrastructure and other things, but also the mindset. There's lack of entrepreneurial mindset within the community. So being Ethiopia, like quite religious, and then sometimes like entrepreneurs are not celebrated, or like being suspicious in general. So people think it's like people are making money. One fact as well, like they had a brief like communist background, in the dark time. So
When
that
was this?
that was like in the 70s, like when after the Haile Selassie, which is the monarchy, is collapsed, it was replaced by a communist military government um, for 17 years, until there was a civil war after that, like, and it's basically like the current government took over and make it democracy. But that 17 years is like it's long enough for people like to have like that thinking of like suspicion about like making money in general. So that mindset is slowly changing, but it's still bad habits in some organizations, especially like with some government institutions.
I've actually heard this to be the case in many past communist and Soviet countries, such as in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, where entrepreneurs have a fear of sharing their ideas and suspicion of entrepreneurship in general.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we had a, yeah, I think we had it a lot of times that startups or, yeah, entrepreneurs came to us with an idea and say like, oh, this is a product I want to build. And then when we were asking about the financials or the business model, they were like, oh, we're just giving it to the community and being very generous. They're like, but you have to earn money to sustain your business. And you could see how they felt quite uncomfortable with it. But that was rather in the early days. I think now it has changed a little bit, and people really understand that, of course, a business needs to make money to sustain.
About the suspicion, or do you still see that in parts of, I guess, the government? I mean, I hear that sometimes the internet is shut off, and you guys talked about low foreign investment because there's high regulations. Can you go into a little bit about that? But also, I have heard recently that the country is opening up in terms of the telco regulations.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's like there is a new government, technically, like a new government coming to Ethiopia, like in the last 2 years. So since Abiy come to power, like there is a general like freedom for the people. So on the ground, actually, things are quite becoming more relaxed. It's not that anymore people actually scared of police or something like this. But when it comes to internet, like I think actually supports shutting down of the internet, which I'm really surprised. Of course, that doesn't reflect from the technology community. Like that's just a general like public opinion. But it's been like a problem. Like even like recently, like internet was shut down for 2 weeks. Yeah, just like blackout, disconnected. So I mean, I think that's quite a problem. Like now we have a upcoming election coming around April next year. Um, Again, like we expect some kind of problem with the internet. Um, but otherwise, like the telecom privatization is like a great step forward. So Abiy like promised that when he came to power, and then I think they already like now in the process of like shortlisted the telecoms, who's gonna take over part of the Ethio Telecom, and I think that would really improve like like the quality and the different services attached to that.
Right. We've been waiting for that since, I don't know, 5 years at least. I think so. That's been a plan for a very long time. Yeah, and one reason is that I think that there are a lot of technical challenges and within Ethio Telecom, how the network was built and established. So that is one reason for a lot of internet interruptions or unavailability, because there were multiple suppliers for all the network tools and technologies. And I think that is one. Then the other reason is that I think, back in the days, the government has underestimated the power of social media. So then, their reaction to any unrest is switching the internet off to stop spreading false news, because that is still something quite difficult. I would say that a lot of people are abusing the freedom of speech in Ethiopia and really spreading fake news and creating unrest through that.
Hmm. Can you give people a bit more detail on what's happening? So they're opening up for more competitors, or are they telling Ethiotel, you better improve your service, or?
Yeah, so basically, I think they're splitting Ethio Telecom in two. And so foreign telco providers can invest in either one and take over operations, so that there's a competition basically in the market, which is pretty much appreciated because the prices are still, I think, compared to other countries, even in Africa, quite extreme.
But the mobile internet's actually like been like reduced in the last year. So I think it's like the price is still quite expensive even after the decrease. I think it's still one of the most expensive internet. Of course, Ethio Telecom says like it's cheap internet, but especially comparing to like people's like paying capacity, it's really like quite expensive. I don't know many people who are actually like put their internet on all the time because they're afraid of like losing money like with auto downloads and stuff like that.
And with increased competition and then increased quality, isn't the state afraid that people might abuse it even more?
No, I think, I mean, so it's a public debate that is going on, and I think people are getting more and more aware of it. How yeah, misinformation even has led to violence in the past years. And I think that there is an emphasis on like basically educating the population in rather being more critical with social media and the news that they get from certain people there or networks. I think that's the I would say better way than shutting it more down more often.
It's a very proactive approach, education first. I like it. What are three local problems, opportunities that startups can really be solving?
Where to start? I think one is definitely logistics. That has been a huge issue and is still super expensive. One, because Ethiopia is a land. Any kind of logistics. So in the whole transportation of personal goods, industrial, commercial goods, anything. Uh, so um, because still I think it takes ages for a container to arrive. Once it arrived uh, in the customs, I mean that's probably cannot interfere with customs procedures, but that would take like a month or something to get it out from there. But even then, like distribution right now is happening like more on traditional ways. Like it goes to the wholesalers in Mercato, that's the central market area, and from there it goes on. So I think there's a lot of middlemen that you can also cut out through smart logistic approaches. Um, and then I believe like the since the industrialization is starting in Ethiopia, there's a lot of services that you can build around there. So around the industrial parks, in terms of IT support or workforce management, um, anything in that area, I believe. But then even supply management, because right now everything is coming from abroad that is being processed in these industrial parks, and so I think anything of traceability, quality assurance would make or would definitely help improve building the local economy um, around these industrial parks. And third, I think, I mean, that's probably in all across the continent is definitely crypto. So we've been collaborating with IOHK quite a while. So IOHK is very proactive in Ethiopia and pushing also for a lot of projects to happen. And we see that there's a huge need, like in whatever it is, like again, traceability, but then also land ownership.
I love when I hear stories of emerging markets adopting crypto in interesting ways that are also needs versus nice to have. For example, places like Venezuela, where they're using cryptocurrency to battle hyperinflation of 53 million% since 2016. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Iceaddis, because I know it was one of the first, or if not the first, accelerator founded in Ethiopia to support the startup ecosystem. So what was your guys' initial vision?
When we started talking about this in 2010, 2011, the idea is, really like creating technology communities in Ethiopia, but also like opening opportunities for young people to start their companies, especially in the university setup. So we have like a program from the German Development Corporation that all the founders are part of it. We are so very close like to the university setup. So we work with Addis Ababa University, specifically like in one campus. And we're looking at the profile of like students who have like great ideas, but they don't have like resources and opportunities to start their business because of the many different challenges, right? But also what we learn, like this is like way back in 2011, where we also learned that no one is really talking about startups in Ethiopia. Like the concept is like very foreign, and the government doesn't have like any strategy about like how to support startups. They're focusing on government, like led organizations, bigger organizations like Ethio Telecom or Ethiopian Airlines. We also talk with other organizations like Google, for instance, were one of our first supporters together with JZ, was really like to give us like tools and resources how to build technology community. At that time was particularly around like, like Google technology user groups, but that actually like expanded quite a lot into other small groups like bloggers. There are like, Android developers. There are people who are actually developing for web, mobile and stuff like that. So we're also looking at, like ideas, simple ideas, for instance, people who are developing mobile app for tourists in Ethiopia, because that's quite like tough to get information from the local perspective in that time where internet was around 0.1% penetration. So it's really less than 1% of penetration of internet at that time when we started. So it's almost nobody had internet connection. So it was kind of a crazy idea to start a tech hub without internet penetration.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by a lot of the practical education that comes from accelerators. One, to build entrepreneurs, but more importantly, to help people develop the critical thinking, like you were talking about, Florian, to solve problems, right? That's all an entrepreneur is at the end of the day. Speaking of which, I'm really curious, what are some successful local startups that have come out of the Ethiopian market?
Companies like 50 Lomi, actually like their business analytics company. You can compare them like, like Oracle and SAP, but from really local perspective for Ethiopia. And they're supplying like software solutions within the Ethiopian business context. And they're doing very well. Like if you're looking at, even the biggest hospital in Ethiopia, they run their system and they're also expanding. But others like bigger names like Langbot, it's called Botter. It has also Facebook background because Facebook backs them up with a competition, and they producing like AI based bots for education. So they have kind of a global like perspective in that, and it's been launched in many different markets. They're getting a lot of attention as well. But if you're looking at also like, classical businesses like delivery and taxi ride, we also have like quite good startups coming out of that. Just looking at the delivery, for instance, there is one company called Addis. So they deliver food, but also now like they expand a little bit more. They're doing like quite well in Ethiopia. Like they have a very critical mass in terms of like their transaction. And people, especially like after COVID, when everyone is like at home, everybody wants to order, going to supermarkets, right? And going to like restaurants. And that has like a huge impact in both ways. One, in the demand side, of course, but also on the supply side, there are many restaurants, they don't have access to, like people coming to their restaurant because people are afraid of COVID. But now all of a sudden they have like a continuous market to supply through delivery businesses. So I mean, Zimo also another one that's doing deliveries like they're going also quite big. The other side, if you're looking at the taxi ride app, like there's one called Ride Ethiopia. They also like really like successful within a very short period of time. So they really increased like from a couple of taxis within a few months, they reached like 12,000 drivers. So there's a huge number of like growth with actually like with a fraction of investment if compared to like Uber or other places. So it's there's a huge like market opportunity for this kind of startup. So they are kind of champions in that regard. But also there are other like more sustainable development related businesses are also coming out. Even within Iceaddis, for instance, retail enterprise, they are working on they call like radically affordable pipeline system. So they're actually building pipeline in the rural homes where people have to walk to get water. And this kind of like sustainable model, like startups, diversifying technology with with construction or other sectors, are becoming like more and more important in the Ethiopian ecosystem. So they're also like becoming interesting, bigger in the market. E-commerce is lagging behind. in other markets, you're talking about like Jumia and stuff, but in Ethiopia, that's quite tough. I mean, already Florian mentioned about the logistic, but also like, there is a mapping and addressing issue. So it's really like lagging behind. But now, since Abiy come to power, there is a lot of progress in that as well. Like they make, for instance, a digital receipt as a legal receipt. This is one of the barriers before for e-commerce. And also like they have now a strategy policy for e-commerce. So it's slowly coming in that regard. So I would expect in the next few years, e-commerce also be one of the biggest.
I'm so excited to check out these startups. They seem like pretty promising models. I'm curious, these sound like sound business models. What is the key challenges that they're facing in scaling?
The internet connectivity is like one challenge, that people are not getting like proper internet services from both supply and demand side. I think that's quite a challenge. But I think there are also like other challenges, like the logistic is quite a big challenge, but also like just in general, like about the mindset of the people, how they use technologies. So people actually like think that if they use technologies, like, they would be out of jobs. I think this is probably globally debated uh, in that regard. I think you can really see that in Ethiopia, there is a resistance from employees in some, kind of setting up like infrastructure like that, because people think this will take their jobs, or they make them like irrelevant in that setup. But also like people will be hesitating about like in directly like investing on these technologies. I mean, that's also like the challenge where even like bigger private organizations, they're hesitating like to put a lot of money upfront for technological solutions like Oracle or SAP. So they would rather like go for like a little bit more low risk, cheaper options, or like in long-term payment systems, where they can see that if this is really help them, then they can invest more in the future. So that suspicion of like, is it really like helping me? There is no real like product management, capacity or a skill in the country. So I mean, this is very rare skill in the country. In terms of like challenges for startups, I always say like there are two ways, right? You can see it like from the starting, so like how hard is to start a business, and also like how hard is like to grow a business. So in the past years, like no one is really talking about growing a business, like the scaling up. That's never been even a topic, because it's just never have like any opportunity for that. But with the efforts of like a lot of people, including Iceaddis, so starting a business is becoming more and more easier now. And a lot of people, when they come up with ideas, they actually engage in founding a company, and much faster. But now the question is like, how do you grow them, right? So if you're looking at especially like the investment sector, there is no many angel investment networks. There are like two in establishment. There is one relatively established, who are actually backing up early stage startups, but still, they're not particularly looking for technology startups. They're looking for portfolio companies of like all kind of companies. So they're looking at manufacturing, they're looking at import export, they're looking at anything which makes money. So since technology is like, of course, like one of the interesting topic, you can see that some of the angel networks invested on technology. But on the other hand, it's like, investors always ask who's gonna take over, like who's gonna like buy the shares later on. So secondary kind of market doesn't exist yet. So there is no stock market in Ethiopia, and there is no like big VC firms like established. There are like around 14 VC companies who are interested in investing in Ethiopia. But if you're looking at their portfolios, you're looking at like manufacturing or like agro processing. These are the two, like, the kind of the key businesses they're interested in, for obviously good reasons. But technology is not yet in that radar. Also, the technology companies also not ready yet to absorb that amount of investment. We're talking about 5 million. So most of the startups, even with Iceaddis, their requirement is like ranging from $10,000 up to $250,000. So that's kind of like the range where no one is also providing this investment yet in Ethiopia. So if you're looking at 2 million, like 5 million, there are VCs who are willing to invest that amount, but which tech companies can absorb that? Actually, like none really. So this is where the challenge really coming from. How do you grow these companies to the next level, and so they're not actually like kind of stuck into this stage where they have a huge potential, but there is lack of liquidity in putting them like into like in a high growth stage. So I see this is like becoming more a challenge, and I think the government and other key stakeholder players also start to see that as a challenge.
So speaking to Samunza from Bongo Hive, and he was saying there's a mismatch between investors wanting to put a certain amount in the ecosystem, so like you said, the 2 millions up, versus what these startups need. And it's kind of crazy because the problem seems like there's too much money from the investor side, and from the local startup side, it's like they're not ready to accept all of that. So they had talked about coming up with a fund to take in something like 2 million, but split it across multiple startups, which I think could be a really interesting solution to tackle that. Has there been, I mean, you guys have been around for, you said, 10 years, 9 years. What are some of the major milestones you've seen in in this past decade?
One of the biggest milestones is really that there's more government support now for startups. So, and I think that has manifested in different ways, some positive, some not so positive. I think they were first trying to do everything by themselves, in looking at the private sector rather as a competition. And started their own centers, and I would say sunk a lot of money there. But at the end, they also understood some of the challenges that startups are facing. For example, that you don't need a physical business address anymore to register your business, or you can register in a co-working space. So that, I think these things got quite easier now. So that has happened. Um, and I think another milestone is now that more hubs have opened over the last years at supporting startups, and more programs are running. I think so that is more specific to our business model as Addis. We're collaborating a lot with aid organizations or that are looking or focusing on certain sectors and trying to understand how to build sustainable businesses in these sectors. Maybe health or agriculture. Anything. And I think that has are some really good developments over the past years that also enabled us to continue business and to grow step by step.
And I'm so excited about these next coming years with the telco regulations opening up. You mentioned this new leader that you guys feel very optimistic about. And just hearing this conversation, sharing all the potential. So if people now, after hearing this episode, they're like, whoa, I really want to contribute to Ethiopian startup ecosystem. What are 2 to 3 ways they can help?
So I think if like there are 2 or 3 different ways, I would say. Like one is like from the skill development side. I mentioned earlier about like the product management skill is like something that's really missing in Ethiopia, especially from the technology side. And this kind of like hard skill, but also like there is a lot of soft skill. Like if you see like how the sales is happening like from Nigeria and Kenya, like there's a very like advanced way of like communicating. There are like very good salespeople, but in Ethiopia, like just in general, like partly because of like the culture, people are a little bit more not outspoken in many ways, but also like there is lack of like communication. Ethiopia is like quite far from the international markets. Literally, like also the language aspect. Even though English is widely spoken, it's really not like common, right? So Ethiopia has like its own language, and Amharic being especially like it's very different. Like it hasn't been like really growing in terms of like from technology side yet. So the influence is like very low. So there's a need for like hard and soft skill development in the startup ecosystem.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The shout out to the audience. You can provide any of those. And those are common themes we've heard across the other interviewers from folks in Zambia, Nigeria, and from South Africa. So thank you guys so much for just giving us a glimpse of Ethiopia's startup ecosystem. I think I feel very optimistic about the country, about the startup ecosystem there. You guys have been at this for a decade, and things are about to move really fast in the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, of course, feel free, like our contacts to your audience. If people want us to learn more about the Ethiopian startup ecosystem, we are very happy to chat with them.